So we spoke last year about Masters of the Universe, and I told you a story about how my mom sold all my toys. And this project is reminding me of a different experience that when I was in high school, we had a film club during lunch where we would go and the teacher would let us watch whatever we wanted. And that was the first place that I saw Clerks, and worked at a video store. And I remember getting all the VHS that I could. I had an insane collection of VHS. Now it's DVDs and eventually streaming. You get all this stuff, but there's just something awesome about having a tangible that you can keep that's in your hands.
Yeah, oh yeah.
This is the polar opposite of that because it's still something sort of tangible because people are going to have it, but it's a very limited amount. So
Yeah,
there's not going to be as wide of an audience for this as you would for a theatrical release, a streaming release. Do you think that that is going to contribute to people pirating this movie and trying to do whatever they can to get a hold of it?
I'm sure there'll be some piracy, to say the least. Even when we make a movie that's widely available, it gets pirated. So if you make it even less accessible, I'm sure it'll get out there in the world. For me, it's not like, hey man, there's only going to be 5,555 copies of this movie and nobody will ever see it except those people. Basically, like the NFT for us is kind of the first window of distribution, and it's going to be a
Okay.
large window, but Kilroy will eventually be seen by folks who are outside of the crypto community. This is just, they get it first. So there will be one day a signable version of Kilroy that somebody can hold. I still live in a physical media world. I mean, look, even in the world of NFTs, there's also physical media attached to some of them and stuff. So that eventually anyone who cares will be satisfied. If they're like, hey man, I'm not in crypto, how am I going to see this movie? We got you covered as well, down the line. So some folks are like, why are you doing this all? I'm like, well, number one, because we get to be first. That's very rare you get to say that anymore. And I'm no dummy. I know that, like, based on the last year of hearing from folks within the studio industry, the last year since we started talking about like, hey, we're going to take Kilroy out, all those cats are just like, we're watching. Because if we make a nickel, bet on you're going to buy one more version of Terminator 2 as an NFT, man. Like,
Right.
they'll be releasing their home libraries in the same way. So the reason to do it is because we own the asset. My producer, David Shapiro, is a big fan of crypto and had been the guy that got me into the field in the first place. And then I said one day, I was like, well, hey man, like we were just going to sell this movie the traditional route, but it's ours and it's not that expensive. You want to take a chance and like try releasing it as the first NFT? So he was like so down with it. And then that was when we were like, we'll auction it to one person. Thankfully, the good folks at Secret reached out to us. They had just done the Quentin auction with the Pulp Fiction NFT. And they had a better idea, which is like, don't do it that way. Just like, we'll mint a bunch and it'll be like a limited run. They described it as like, think of it like a steel book. And I was like, you're speaking my language. I know exactly what a steel book is. So very dressed up special edition. But there will be a version, a DVD down the road that folks who are not into NFTs or into Web3 can enjoy themselves. But going to your original point, I'm sure it'll get bootlegged. I'm honestly shocked that shit I'm currently writing isn't already bootlegged. We live in a world where people can access your laptop like fucking crazy in a frightening way. So that's something as a creator that you just kind of get used to. And when you work for a studio, of course, the party line is always like, oh man, that sucks. Like, we hate that. But as a creative, like, my feeling has always been like, as the guy who made the thing, maybe didn't pay for the thing or had the thing bought from him, but as the guy who made the thing, it really doesn't matter to me where they watch it. Like, yeah, financially it benefits me if they do it the proper way or go through the channels that we've set up. But like, you know how many fans I picked up over the years by people just like downloading the movie for free or watching shit on YouTube and whatnot? Like, when you're real tight and trying to like cock block that audience, you're giving up a piece of an audience. Like, and maybe they can't buy you that day or what you're selling that day, but you build a fan over a course of a few years. I can't tell how many people on social media always tell me like, hey, I bootlegged this 4 years ago. I'll give you $20 when I see you at the con, you know. I'm like, keep your $20. I'm just glad they watched the thing. So, you know, you always have two minds when you're an artist, because commerce comes into the conversation from time to time, oftentimes.
Mhm.
But in this occasion, you know, I'm not saying like we're all, you know, fucking crazy non-capitalists and shit. We're all communists. We don't care about the money. Obviously, we care about the money. But there's also a sense of like, well, if it gets passed on, it gets passed on. You know, you got to remember, I was of a generation where you would take a copy of Monty Python and the Holy Grail from the video store, then you would copy it yourself and return that copy. And then you became the video store for all your friends, where you were like, you got to watch this.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
there's something to be said for being like the tastemaker or the person who passes on something nobody's seen before. So, you know, in a career that's lasted like 3 decades, you kind of expect that some people aren't going to do it the way that everyone wants them to do it. But you also know that that's not the worst thing in the world. That's how you create backdoor fans, which sounds way dirtier than I meant it. But, you know, it's the, some people don't want to be sold to. Some people in the moment just want to sample and or steal. Like, okay, like, you know, it's not ideal, but it happens. We live in a digital culture where that's easy. That doesn't mean it's always going to be the case with them. Doesn't
Right.
mean that like one day down the road, they're not going to be like, well, you know what? I've been watching this shit for free for years. I'm going to buy that fucking thing. And maybe that's when I need it the most. So, you know, it's a negative, but it's not the end of the world. And positive can come from it.
Yeah, and I think back to also, like, I'm a diehard Stephen King fan, love his stuff,
Mm.
and he released The Green Mile, and those monthly installments were old Charles Dickens style, where you had to go buy it and you didn't get the whole book until it was all done.
Is that
And
right? Is
yeah,
that
it was a
how he
huge.
released Green Mile?
Yeah, he released 6 paperbacks, little mass market paperbacks, each like 100 pages, and it was huge bestseller. I have them all, and then the next year released as a trade paperback, and I went out and bought that too. So you're right, people will go and buy all these different versions, and then he tried it online with another book where he was releasing a chapter. It said pay whatever you want, and eventually people stopped paying and just downloading it. So he never released the whole book. So to this day, the whole thing is not fully published.
Right.
If this turns out to be a hit, and I mean, if even if people pay $100 for each of those NFTs, it's a nice money right there. If this turns out to be a big success, would you envision doing this with other projects that you have? I mean, even with Clerks 3, one of the movies I've been waiting my forever for, would
Clerks
that be
3,
something that you would do?
thanks to the good folks at Lionsgate, you're going to get Clerks 3
Yeah.
thrown in your face like crazy in the next few months. Would I do other things here in Web3 in this milieu as an NFT? Absolutely. My business is macro as much as I can get it to be macro, but I ain't Star Wars and Marvel, so that has a ceiling. The benefit of my business is how micro it can go. You know, they say now if you find 1,000 people to pay you every month to do what it is you do, quit your job, that's your career. So in that world, like, I'm okay with the audience being smaller. Like, I don't need the world. I never have. And I don't live off the world. I live off a very small audience. There's nothing wrong with that. If they're motivated, if they're the ones going like, yeah, all right, you're my thing, so I'm gonna get that thing too. So I'm okay with things getting smaller on that level. I'm also, this is weird to admit, but creatively, like as somebody who has to deal with the slings and arrows of people's reactions to things, like there's no downside to shrinking the audience to just people that like what you do. Maybe the downside is your shit gets uncreative, I guess, but I'm old, my shit's uncreative now or whatever the fuck. But having the audience, having everyone on board for the thing you do and not, you know, having to try to sell to people who are never coming in the first place and giving away screenings to people who don't give a shit, you know, and aren't going to move the ball forward. I've tried it their way for decades, you know, that when conventional wisdom says this is how it's done, that's fine. but I'm old enough now and wise enough to be like, well, maybe I could try a different way. And I'm very interested in, like, if I release a movie, you know, the whole world has something to say about it, good and bad. People who can't wait for it, like you were talking about Clerks 3, or people who are like, you're just one of 18 fucking movies that are coming out this week, and I don't even respect you as a filmmaker. So I always have to play to everybody when we release a movie. With this, I can literally just play to the people who want it. That's it. I don't have to try to convince a bunch of people. Like, you know, trust me, you say the word NFT in public, you'll get 1,000 opinions right now, informed or otherwise. There's something nice about putting out a movie and not having to worry, like, oh, that paper that always hates me, like they're going to write something bad about it as per usual. Probably not, because now it's outside of their sphere of influence, or maybe they don't even know it's happening because they don't keep tabs on that world. But that doesn't frighten me. The idea of, like, you know, getting rid of folks who are just ready to shit on it anyway. Like, you know, I've watched fandom go to very bizarre places over the course of the last 10 years. And, you know, now fandom in pop culture very much resembles what sports fandom looked like for years. There are people that don't necessarily, you know, like the New Jersey Devils. They just hate the fucking New York Rangers. So they root like hell for the Jersey Devils. It's not quite the same as loving something, as much as hating the other thing. So in a world where that's fraught with that type of possibility, you know, it's nice to be actually heading into the marketplace in a world where I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to deal with that, you know, a month later with Clerks. I'm going to hear from everybody, whether I did right or wrong. But the idea of a shrunken, more, you know, supportive audience that you're going into each and every time, it's not that different from what we did with the Jay and Silent Bob Reboot Roadshow tour. Like, we took it to 65 cities and played it in 1,000-seaters to people who are like, this is the movie that I like. My whole year is this movie. So you can't let me down. You know what I'm saying? Like, even we had people on the tour who are like, look, ain't my favorite movie, but what a party. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't lose those cats. You could definitely lose other cats all the time. I've been shedding audience members for years, if not picking up people who are like, I don't like what you do. So the idea of shrinking it to, like, everyone in this room likes what's going on, that's a good time.
And I was at Star Wars Celebration last month, and I was in the
same
room.
thing, same principle. It's
and
just
I was in,
theirs much larger.
But I was in the room for the premiere of the first episodes, and when Leia comes out on screen, the fan that was sitting next to me burst into tears. Like, she had been waiting her entire life to see Leia back as a child. She's crying, and people are reacting. So when I went to review it for the site, gave it a 10 out of 10. Like, the experience altered it for me with how much I loved it. People are ripping me apart in the comments going, what the hell's wrong with you?
What are you crazy? You think you're allowed to like what you like anymore? No.
Exactly. And I mean, I write a column for JoBlo called The Unpopular Opinion, where the whole concept is, I love movies that people hate. I hate movies that people love. I never do it to troll, but I got ripped apart for giving Goodfellas a negative review. And I got ripped apart for saying that The Last Jedi is the best of all the Star Wars movies. So
it's brave. That I mean, look, the Last Jedi thing has been around for a while, and people feel that way. But the Goodfellas thing is controversial, man. That's brave right there.
It was rough when I had to interview Ray Liotta a few months back, when I would do everything I could not to tell him that I wrote that, because you got to be careful. But you know, reading the comments when the trailer came out for Killroy and all the information that's out there, and the comments, everybody's like, well, you must be releasing it this way because it sucks, and it would never get released theatrically. And I watched the trailer, and it reminds me of those good old 70s anthologies and slasher films where it's just a blast, and you don't care if the kills look real or if they look fake, as long as they are gory and you have a good time. So is that what the whole...
It's creep show. Like, you know, I get to make my version of creep show, and you know, it's little anthology stories. There's rubber masks and blood spurting and stuff like that. This is the 80s horror movie that I grew up watching and loving. So when we were making it as this small project with the Sarasota College of Art and Design, you know, it was meant to be that. I was like, we're doing it in chapters rather than just make short films. Let's make chapters and put it together as an anthology film. So it was never intended to be like, this will redefine my career. But it was a movie that I'm like, I grew up watching this movie. And if this is how I get to make one of those, let's fucking do this. This should be fun. In terms of the quality of the picture, the everyone will eventually see it. So it's like that part to me doesn't like wash, where it's just like, well, it must suck. I'm like, well, Yoga Hosers sucked according to the audience, you know, the critics in the audience, but we still
Right.
put that out. So you can't stop a bad movie. I have made, according to others, bad movies, and we release them all the time. There's no such thing as like, well, we made it, let's just put it on a shelf. Like at the end of the day, if somebody put $1 down for it, somebody wants to see that dollar come back. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's one way for somebody to look at it, like, oh, it must suck if he's putting out as an NFT. For me, I'm like, if I don't do it, somebody's going to do it. And then for the rest of my life, I'll be like, could have done it. Look, perfect example. Years ago, before Kickstarter and Indiegogo exist,
Yeah.
me and John Gordon are like a producer of Red State. I was like, look, I got 1 million followers on MySpace. If each one give us $1, we could probably make that movie. So we came up with the idea of a website called Red State Green, where we're going to turn to the audience who knew the script existed and been asking me about it for years, and be like, look, if you donate, we can make this movie and stuff. So again, before Kickstarter and Indiegogo existed, and we were ready. It was built. We spent like 20 grand building the website, about to turn it on. And I was in Canada doing press for, I don't know what it was, maybe Zach and Miri or something. So I'm in a small press conference. It might not have been for Zach and Miri. It might have been me up there doing press for the Walter Gretzky street hockey tournament. It could have been that, but it was in Toronto, and it was a small round table. And somebody asked, what are you doing next as a movie? And I was like, oh, we just built this website called Red State Green, because we're going to try to finally make that movie Red State. We're going to raise the money from the audience. And then the next day, somebody at the roundtable wrote an article that was like, ew, Kevin Smith is going to beg for money for his next movie. And that fucking terrified me, scared me. And I instantly killed it. Like, told John, we're not doing this anymore. He's like, we spent all this money to build the website. I was like, we'll just do it traditionally. We'll find financiers. Like, we're not doing this. And then a year later, you know, who was it? You know, the guy who did Garden State.
Zach Braff.
Zach, his name I smoked away. Zach, you know, went to Kickstarter and crowdsourced, financed Wish You Were Here, whatever the movie was called. He was a first in history. And I was like, those were my spoils, but I was too afraid to reach for it. So I promised myself this time around with this, I was like, I don't care what anybody says, because I've lived through this shit before. Like, just because you're first through the door, you take all the fucking abuse and the bullets and shit, but like, don't mean I'm wrong. So
Right.
I was like, I'm going to stick with it this time. Like, I don't care if people say he's wrong or his movie must suck, whatever the fuck. Go ahead, say it. Because 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I'm going to be able to be like, oh, one of the first things we ever did in my career, like among the things, was like we put out Killroy as an NFT, you know, and it ain't going to be historic. It's not going to be on my gravestone, but I don't know if anyone's ever looked at my Wikipedia, but it's fucking long.
Yeah. It's
I
huge.
like seeing it extend with adventure stories. Like, look, at the end of the day, all I got, and like I started as a filmmaker telling stories, and then I turned my life into the story. And so you always have to add thrilling chapters so that people still give a shit, right? Now, I ain't making Star Wars movies and Marvel. That'd be the easiest way to, you know, add a chapter where people are like, hey, you're doing stuff everybody likes. I find creative ways to kind of do it for myself. And the idea of like the Killroy section of my Wikipedia page, you know, that thrills me. It's like one more story of like, oh, he also did this. And that was after he did this, but right before he did this. So it's a thing worth doing because someone else is going to do it. And you know, I don't get many bragging rights anymore. You know, I'm old and aging out of creativity. Quentin always says like filmmaking is a young man's game or young filmmaker's game. So being able to go through the door first one more time in my career, in a chance that I might not go through many doors first going further, I'm not gonna pass that up just because some people are like, this is stupid. I'm like, all right, like, to be fair, every day of my life, somebody online tells me how stupid I am and how I'm doing this wrong. So like, I've learned to just kind of be like, I get it. You know, you accept it, it passes through you, and you just kind of continue on your course. Like, if the internet had existed, I know this for a fact now. And I'm not just saying this facetiously, and I ain't just saying it to throw the word clerks out there one more time, but I wouldn't have made Clerks if the internet existed back then. Oh my
Right.
God, the amount of negativity, the amount of people saying you can't, the amount of people saying like you suck, couldn't have done it. So sometimes you just gotta listen to this and this. And again, we're not talking about some like, this is me trying to cure cancer. This is like me putting out a fucking, our version of Creep Show as an NFT. The world will be fine after this, whether it works or not.
And so I really appreciate your time. And I have one more question for you.
No,
And
away.
it's going talking about chapters in your life and revisiting things. What is the likelihood of Mallrats coming back at this point?
Here, I'll tell you my plan. I'm hoping it's strong. I think Clerks 3 is a very strong picture that I think will get some cats talking about like, oh, you can go home again. And here we've got Mallrats loaded up in the chamber, ready to go. We have been having a 2-3 year conversation with the folks at Universal at a very specific division, not big Universal where everything is fast and furious, but the kind where they make the movies that go straight to video and stuff. I got no problem with that. I know where my audience is. Problem is budget. Basically they got a hard cap of this, and our movie is just slightly more. And we can't ameliorate with tour because they don't want to do that sort of thing. Like they own it, it's theirs, do with it as they want. So there's a very thin line by which we can make the movie. And right now that it's harder to do it because there's no enthusiasm whatsoever. People are like, oh, this would be fine, but it's not like we need this fucking thing. So I'm working on something with Peacock at the moment, some completely unrelated thing. And if that goes, I feel like Peacock might be the place, it's the universal streaming app. Feels like that might be the place. Like, big boy Universal, big girl Universal, like honestly, they don't even know they own us. There have been times where we've reached out to be like, can we pick up the Mallrats license? And they're like, why would you ask us? I'm like, because you guys own Mallrats. Like, we do. There's always a moment where I'm interacting with folks at Universal where I reveal that they own Mallrats. Well, they're like, I love Mallrats. I'm like, oh, it's your movie. And they're like, is it? I'm like, yeah, that's a Universal movie. It was made through Gramercy, which was co-owned by Universal and Polygram, but you guys own the copyright. It's yours. So, it's not, they're like, we make movies where cars go very, very fast, Kevin, and things like that. We don't make movies set in malls anymore. Mall culture is dying. So I got to find a creative way to make it happen. Peacock might be the most inventive solution. And so far my relationship with the folks over there has been good. They've been a fun bunch of kids to work with. So I was like, perhaps this is the way that it gets done. And some cats are like, oh man, just do it as a movie. Like, I have control over that, kids. Like, I don't own this shit. Like, I made this shit years ago for other people. So every time I want to play with my toys again, with the exception of Jay and Silent Bob, I own them. But anytime I want to play with my toys again, it ain't up to me. Sometimes people are like, just do it this way. And I'm like, if I could, this would have been done 10 years ago, but I don't own this. The people that own it really don't give a fuck as much as I give a fuck. So it's been a slow dance. In fact, Clerks 3 exists because Liz Destro, one of my producers on Clerks 3, we were coming off of Reboot, and I knew that I eventually wanted to do Clerks 3, but we had already had Mallrats in motion since before Reboot even. And Liz said to me, she goes, I'll bet you $100 that if you wrote Clerks 3, I can get that made before Universal will make Mallrats. And I was like, all right, let's try. And here we are. We're about to release Clerks 3, and we're still having a very slow moving, painstaking conversation with Universal. So I hope that's the bright spot for the future, because the story is really cool. Like the script for Twilight of the Mallrats, I absolutely adore, and it totally plays. And there's a scene I desperately want to shoot that is our version of the Stan Lee scene, and we can't do Stan because Stan's not here, but I found a way to do it where it's almost like the next best thing. So there's so many reasons I would love to do it, not the least of which is like, I wrote it, I just want to see it happen. You got to remember now, after like 3 decades, I'm spoiled like that. Generally speaking, anytime I'm like, I want to do a thing, we wind up making the thing. It's very rare that the thing that I want to do doesn't wind up happening. This is one that I feel like, with the amount of, like, if I just roll up the sleeves and pour in the elbow grease, we can maybe bring it across the finish line. But I'll be honest with you, it's always easier to pivot to the thing that looks like it's easier to make happen. And thankfully, like, we were coming off of a Jay and Silent Bob reboot, and we sold a bunch of DVDs and Blu-rays apparently for Lionsgate, because Lionsgate was like, look, you sold so many home video units, like not streaming and shit, but actual fucking concrete shit, that any movie you want to do set in this world at this budget level, we're there for it. So I was like, oh, all right, this is perfect, man. Like, here's the script to Clerks 3. So it's been a really great relationship so far. I wish they owned Mallrats, but that's Universal. And we've tried to take it out. Universal won't do that sort of thing. So there's a very thin bridge we cross by which to make Mallrats, and it's just going to take time. But
awesome.
I got nothing else to do.
Well, I appreciate your time. It's very exciting talking to you. Can't wait to check out Killroy.
Talking to you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good luck.
Damn pleasure, man. See you later, Ox.
Bye.
Bye.
Blind the eyes that cannot see, make deaf the ears that cannot hear, close the mouth that cannot tell, and send the monster back to hell.
Back then, his name was Roy Huggins. When he was your age, he already had a taste for blood.
Holy shit.
What is happening?
Nothing will stop Kilroy if he wants to get you.
God!
You almost gave me a heart attack. I'm a middle-aged man who eats like shit and huffs floor cleaner all day.
This is Alicio and Ernesto.
Hola, amigos. Me llamo Father Pat. Come on out.
The online donations have put us over the top.
It's going to take a lot more money for that heart transplant.
Kid killing boogeyman, that is just some superstitious bullshit.
Look out!
I'll make my special sweet tea.
You gonna come smoke?
Yes! You see that? The gator chaser did it again! No! Help! Get the shit!
Cassie, I'm coming to Killroy!
Better get the mob.